If you want to be a data analyst, you need to know what SQL constraints are, so let me give you a super quick crash course. These notes are linked in my bio for you to download for free. So SQL constraints are rules that we apply to columns in a table. And you can think of constraints like guidelines for the columns in a table that you're creating in SQL. So the most common constraint is the primary key. Every table needs a primary key, and every table can only have one primary key. The primary key is the unique ID given to each row in a table. So it's always unique and it's not null, meaning it must have a value. So for example, if you're creating a table with employee data, and your first column is the employee ID, this field would be your primary key because each employee needs an employee ID and no two employees will have the same ID. Next, we have the foreign key. This is how you're going to link two tables together. So for example, if I have two tables, employees and departments, and I want these two tables to share the column department ID, I would just use this syntax to make sure that my column department ID is the foreign key. Next, we have not null. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You can give a column the not null constraint if you want to make sure that this column always has a value for each row. Next is unique. And this one is also pretty self-explanatory. You can give a column the unique constraint if you want to make sure that all values in this column are different. Unique does allow for null values unless you combine it with the not null constraint, and it can be applied to multiple columns. Next is check. This constraint checks to see if a column meets a specific condition. So for example, you could use the check constraint to make sure that all values in your age column are greater than 18. And lastly, we have default. Default assigns a default value of your choosing if no value is provided. So in my example, I have a status field. I used the default constraint to say that if there's no value for status, then it will default to pending. So those are the most common SQL constraints, and I think that this is one of those concepts that's going to make a lot more sense once you actually start to apply constraints by creating SQL tables. So following this video, I will be posting a video on creating tables in SQL, so make sure to watch that video next so that this information really clicks.